Hey guys, welcome back to my tutorials, and today I'm going to be showing you how you can use class name and ID names when designing your HTML web page or your dynamic web page. So what the entire idea behind this is that when you're using a class, you're going to be effectively generalizing your styling, so that way it can be applied to a variety of different tags underneath the same name. So for example, over here, I've got two divs. Okay, so I've got container 1 and I've got container 2. Now let's say I want to apply stylings to both containers. Originally, I showed you that you can do something like open up your open up div, and then open up your scope, and then have your styling in here. However, let's say I had a third div, but I only wanted the styling to be applied to containers 1 and 2, not to 3. So there is a way to do this, and in order to do this, I'm going to be using something called classes. The general syntax for a class name, or for a class, is the dot, followed by the class name that you call it, then having all your properties with your values. In order to make your class name, within your HTML page, you're going to be going to your tag, and within the tag angular brackets, you're going to say div space class is equal to your class name. Now your class name can be whatever it likes. So I'm going to call this one container and save this. So over here, I can now, in my CSS, I can say container or dot container, and I can say something like border 1 pixel solid black, I can then say width 100 pixels and height 100 pixels. If I refresh my page, I can see nothing has happened, and I think that's because, so as you can see here, I've completely misspelled it. It should be container. So I'm following the exact class name. So when I save this again and remove this, there you go. So now I've got my black box of height 100 with width 100 and height 100 to make my container for container 1. I'm also going to just quickly add a background color as this, which should be a grass kind of green color. Yeah. Okay, so now this has been applied here. If I were to now call the same name, so class is equal to container, so if I were to have the same class name in a different div, the same styling will be applied to that specific div as well. So for example here, I can now say class is equal to container, save it, and as soon as I refresh my page, container 1 and container 3 now have all the same styling associated with it, whereas container 2 does not. What we're going to do is container 2 is slightly different. So what we've just covered now is how you can start to form classes within your CSS documents, which can be used via your HTML in order to generalize properties within, or generalize styling properties for your web page. The next thing we're going to be covering is the ID. So the ID is effectively just a unique identification that can be applied to a specific section of your web page. So as you can see, I've got container 2. Now originally container 2 doesn't contain anything, it's got no styling associated with it. However, let's say I want to give it a very unique classification that is not the same as container. The syntax for this is div ID is equal to, and I'm just going to put in this one, I'm just going to call this one box 2. Okay, so this identification is purely for this particular div. In my CSS, I'm now going to put hashtag box2, and then open up my scope. And within here, I can have my own styling, which will only be applied to box 2. For example, I can say, have the same things, except I'll just use different background colors, I guess, and different dimensions. So I'm going to call this one 50 by 200. And I'll use a different color, which I think is a shade of blue. Refresh my page, and as you can see, it's now been shaded in this kind of turquoisey blue. So let me just go ahead and make this a bit wider. Nope, wrong way. I don't know, 100. There you go. So now as you can see, I've got container 2, which is completely separate from container 3 and container 1, even though they are all still divs. Okay, now let's see what would happen if I were to try to use the same thing for a different div. So if I said div ID is equal to box 2, and then had all the same information, I'll just call this one container 4. Let's see what happens. Funnily enough, the exact same thing happens. Now, when you are typically making your web page, it is conventionally the convention to use a class as something that you're going to be applying to multiple different objects, whereas using your ID for one specific object, even though it will work, it is generally not looked well upon if you do that. Okay, so just bear that in mind when you are making your web pages. Even though it will do the same thing, generally you don't want to be doing this. Generally, if we have two IDs which are going to be the same, just call it under a class instead. So we can just do this. Now, since these are under two different classes, you have to remember to change your syntax properly, and then when you refresh the page, it's going to be exactly the same. Okay, so that's really about it. So that's the basic introduction into divs and classes. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, then feel free to leave them down below, or you can contact me on my website. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial.